This is the one that could potentially get the case dismissed against them. We humans learn by example, and Alec Baldwin is the perfect example of why you never talk to the police or the press. And if you're going to, please have your attorney present, because I would hazard to guess that the reason why Alec Baldwin has been charged by the Santa Fe DA's office is because of all these interviews that he gave. The fact that he spoke to the police.
So my only question is, am I being charged with something?
The fact that he just went on and on about how much of an expert he was about guns. The Santa Fe DA stated for the past year that no one is above the law. In the middle of January of this year, she came out and said that she was going to charge Alec Baldwin, and she gave an interview with CNN to that effect. On January 31st, she did indeed charge Alec Baldwin with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter, as well as Hannah Gutierrez Reed. They're both charged with the same involuntary manslaughter charges. On October 21st, 2021, Alec Baldwin was rehearsing a scene with the DP, director of photography, Helena Hutchins, and the director of the movie Rust, Joel Souza. Alec Baldwin was practicing this cross draw from the right side, and according to his statement, Helena Hutchins was asking him to point the gun towards her, and Baldwin states that he drew the gun, cocked it, and the gun went off. He has emphatically stated numerous times that he never pulled the trigger.
I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never.
Helena Hutchins went down. Joel Souza also went down. They were both taken to hospitals. Helena was airlifted out on a helicopter, and she died 2 hours later at the hospital. It is so heartbreaking to talk about this because she leaves behind her husband and a young son. After the shooting, Alec Baldwin went to the police station and gave this lengthy hour-long interview, waiving his rights to remain silent, waiving his rights to his attorney, and this is really where he should have asserted his Fifth Amendment right to not self-incriminate and to remain silent. That part of the Constitution is such an important and unique part of our U.S. Constitution, and because he did not assert his right to remain silent, the DA's office, after its year-long investigation by the police department, by the FBI, was able to charge Alec Baldwin, and in the charging documents, they refer to Alec Baldwin's statements that he gave during that police interview, as well as his numerous interviews that he gave to the press after the fact. As a practicing attorney, I have been licensed in California for 17 years, and I always tell my clients, do not agree to anything that I have not looked at. Do not talk to anybody without your attorney present. And Alec Baldwin really should have followed that piece of advice, because Alec Baldwin has stated that the first assistant director, David Halls, handed him a gun and said that it was a cold gun. Now, David Halls has taken a plea bargain, received a reduced sentence that is just probation. Alec Baldwin, in his police interview, stated that Gutierrez Reed handed him the gun, and then later on changed his story and said that David Halls handed him the gun. Now, according to Reed's statement, she was either not allowed to go into the church during this scene or was told to go do something else. She apparently prepared the guns, put them down on the ammunitions cart, and then left. Now, it's not unusual for an assistant director to hand the gun to an actor. The DA's office has taken the position that this was an accident. But she states that just because something was an accident doesn't mean that it's not criminal. And that's the position that they are taking. Alec Baldwin did not act the way a reasonable person would act under these circumstances. In her interview, as well as in the charging documents, the DA states that according to industry standards, and it sounds like she's spoken to perhaps high-level actors, perhaps directors and producers, who have stated that the protocol when an actor is handed a gun is it should be handed by the armorer or the assistant director sometimes, but mostly the armorer. The armorer will show the actor the gun, usually opening the gun up and showing them what kind of bullets are in the gun. Usually they are dummies or blanks. They should never be live ammunition, as was the case here. I know a lot of people are focused on the fact that how did this live ammunition get on set? And the DA has stated that she's less concerned about that and might never know the real answer. Today, I wanted to cover the charging documents that were filed by the Santa Fe DA's office against Baldwin and Reed. I also wanted to cover the very interesting motions that were filed by Alec Baldwin's legal team. One, the motion to disqualify the special prosecutor that was assigned to his case. The second motion is the one that's super important because this is the one that could potentially get the case dismissed against them. It is the firearm enhancement that adds 5 additional years to the 18 months that would normally be attached to an involuntary manslaughter case. Baldwin's legal team is asserting that the statute that was in place at the time that Baldwin shot Helena Hutchins stated that there needed to be intent, and the new statute that was passed 7 months later took away this requirement of intent. So I think if his attorneys could potentially prove that there was no intent, and I don't think anyone is arguing that this was intentional, potentially this case could get dismissed. There is going to be a prelim hearing that is basically like a mini trial where the judge will hear from witnesses and the facts presented by the prosecutor. And the judge at that point could very well dismiss the case and not let it go to trial. And I think Alec Baldwin has some very smart lawyers because they are from Quinn Emanuel, which is the best litigation firm in the country. A lot of celebrities go to them as litigators. I also wanted to touch upon the lawsuit that has been filed against Alec Baldwin by Helena Hutchins's parents and sister who live in the Ukraine. If you have found this video to be of value and you learned something, please consider subscribing because it really helps my new channel and I really appreciate it. Now, there are factors I think that are different here than in a typical case where an actor might accidentally fire a gun. The fact that Alec Baldwin was a producer on this film and not like a vanity producer, right? I've explained in my past videos as an attorney in Hollywood for the past 15 years, I do a lot of actor agreements and producer agreements where we give actors vanity producer credits because they might have a production company, maybe they attach their director or another actor, and so we want to kind of give them like a bonus or a reward. But here, this project, Russ, was Alec Baldwin's baby. He worked on the story with Joel Souza, the director. They've worked on the screenplay together. I believe he probably found financing or found the production company that is the on-the-ground producers for this film. So one, he's the producer, and two, which is probably most damning, is the fact that leading up to the day of the fatal shooting of Helena Hutchins, there had been a slew of complaints against the production. Safety violations, safety complaints. That morning, some of the IATSE camera crew had walked off because of not being paid, because of being housed over an hour away. Just remember that when the crew works on these films, they might work 16, 18 hours a day. And then for them to have to drive an hour back to their hotel is really, really challenging. When I work on productions, we always make sure that we try to find hotels that are within 15 minutes of where either the soundstage or the locations are. These things were in place the day the shooting happened. I mean, there's this very sad story of Helena like hugging her camera crew as they left, right? So she was left with a reduced camera crew. She was not protected, right? I mean, Alec Baldwin even states this in his police interview that typically when you have a firearm, you would have like a plexiglass that the camera operator or the DP or the director would stand behind. I don't know why there was a real gun. I mean, for rehearsals, you shouldn't even have a real gun. Sometimes they use just plastic guns. I mean, there's no need for a real gun during a rehearsal or even a prop gun. So that's why Alec Baldwin has been charged, right? Because he was a producer, because there are these safety violations. There are stories of some of the crew or cast taking guns out to, off on their lunch breaks and shooting real guns with real ammunition for target practice. In the charging documents itself, it talks about how an assistant accidentally discharged a gun while she was handling it, and she shouldn't have been handling it at all because she had no training in weapons or ammunitions. So let's move into the charging documents that I have spent last week poring over. So here is the statement of probable cause. The document goes on and states Baldwin's action as an actor and shooter. It states that before this shooting happened, Reed required training, especially to the cross draw, because that's something that is a little more complicated. She requested that Baldwin attend the hour-long training, but Baldwin only attended half an hour of it, and he was distracted by phone calls with his families most of the time. So this would indicate a lack of care or negligence towards a safety requirement that Alec Baldwin ignored. Reed states that Baldwin had very limited training on the cross draw that was required for the scene on the 21st, and limited training in firearms and how to check his own firearm as to whether it was loaded or unloaded, in which Reed felt it was very important in his role as Rust. So this part right here might actually be very helpful to Baldwin as a defense, but this is going to be negated by his interviews with the police, where he states, his expertise with guns, the fact that he knows, the differences between the different blanks and wadding and bullets. If he didn't have that interview for the prosecutor to negate Reed's statement here, he would have a very strong defense. It states that the gun was given to the FBI, and the FBI Quantico Labs performed a lot of different tests on this gun and found that there's no way this gun could have gone off unless the trigger was pulled. In the police interview with Baldwin, he does this action a few times, and he pulls a gun out, and you can tell his right hand kind of flickers very lightly. And what I have found in my research is this specific gun had a very, very light and sensitive trigger. It's very possible that Baldwin doesn't remember pulling on the trigger, right? Because some guns require a very strong pull. This gun required a very sensitive pull. And it's possible that his mind, in trying to protect him from, kind of the tragic trauma, perhaps he's suffering from PTSD and he doesn't really remember it. Our brain sometimes shelters us from, very dramatic incidents by almost censoring our memories around a tragic and traumatic event. That's why a lot of children of abuse don't remember until they're much older. So there was investigation into the supply company in Albuquerque, PDQ Arms and Prop LLC. They did an explosives chemistry examination of the rounds, showed that the smokeless powder in the live rounds found at the scene did not match a live round seized from the Prop's arms supplier in question. This means that the live rounds on Rust did not match the rounds explosive chemistry taken from PDQ Arms and Prop. And that's why they weren't charged, right? Like I stated earlier. So what he says in the police interview was that Reed offered to show him the gun, and he said, no, I didn't want to insult her. I mean, that was a huge red flag when I was watching that interview. Really? He didn't want to insult her, and that was the reason why he didn't check it? It just seems like there were so many different levels of negligence here and people simply not doing their jobs. The document finally states that Baldwin directly pointed a firearm at Hutchins and Souza, whether guided by her direction or not. Baldwin knew the first rule of gun safety is never to point a gun at someone you don't intend on shooting. In addition, always assume a gun is loaded. So the document kind of basically summarizes this is why they're charging Baldwin. This reckless deviation from known standards and practice and protocols directly caused the fatal shooting. By not receiving the required training on firearms, 1, deviating from the required duties of checking the firearm with the armorer, 2, letting the armorer leave the church against protocol, 3, deviating from the practice of only accepting the firearm from the armorer, 4, not dealing dealing with safety complaints on the set. That's 5. 6, not making sure the protocol of safety meetings was occurring. 7, putting his finger on the trigger of a real gun. 8, not using a replica firearm for the unscheduled rehearsal. 9, pointing the gun at Hutchins and Souza. And finally, 10, the overall handling of the firearm in a negligent manner. All of these reasons, and I number these myself. It's not in the document itself, right? Because of these 10 reasons, Baldwin acted with willful disregard for the safety of others and in a manner which endangered other people, specifically Hutchins and Souza. Baldwin clearly should have known the dangers of his actions, which led to the death of Hutchins. I'm not going to go into the whole document because it's 10 pages long, but basically, these are the reasons why Baldwin is being charged. On February 7th, just 7 days after the charges were filed against Alec Baldwin, Alec Baldwin's lawyers brought a motion to disqualify the special prosecutor, Andrea Reeb, who was brought on to assist with this trial. In November, she was elected to the House of Representatives. Baldwin's legal team is stating that there is a conflict in the different branches of power. Baldwin's lawyers argue that the state constitution's separation of powers provision prohibits Reeb from serving as a prosecutor and as a state lawmaker. I think maybe the thinking behind this is because Reeb is a Republican and Alec Baldwin is a very prominent liberal Democrat, that they think that she cannot be impartial as a prosecutor. I think they might actually have a good position here. It's unusual for someone to be both a prosecutor and an elected representative. Some of you might be watching the Alec Murdaugh murder trial and realize that his attorney is also an elected official, but it's different because it's his attorney on the defense side. It's not the special prosecutor, who is both part of the judicial branch and the legislative branch. The other motion that is very interesting is this motion to dismiss the firearm enhancement.
So this is future present Tyler, and sure enough, after I filmed my video, the Santa Fe DA's office dropped the firearm enhancement, and that reduces Alec Baldwin's potential prison sentence to 18 months if he is found guilty.
Alec Baldwin's legal team filed a new motion to remove a firearm sentencing enhancement in the charges brought against him, claiming it is unconstitutionally based on a law passed after the shooting on the Russ set. The prosecutors committed a basic legal error by charging Mr. Baldwin under a version of the firearm enhancement statute that did not exist on the date of the accident, a court filing from Baldwin's attorney said. I do think they have a good chance of removing the firearm enhancement. And also, when I was doing research on this, it showed that there needed to be intent required, which I think Baldwin's team will be able to really argue against that. So the other lawsuit that was recently filed is from Helena Hutchins' parents and sister who live in Ukraine. This is being filed in California, applying New Mexico law. And I believe the reason is because Gloria Allred is representing Helena's parents, and she's licensed in California. She's also representing the scripts supervisor of the same film for damages that the script supervisor incurred because she was near the shooting when it happened. The claim is for loss of consortium, which typically in California is only reserved to the spouse. And remember, Helena's husband filed a civil lawsuit against Alec Baldwin in the production, and they settled last year. They added him as an EP to the film because now they are going to finish the film. And I just read news that they are indeed going forward with that they're planning on finishing this production. Now, they probably have to find out what's happening with Baldwin. Perhaps they assume that Baldwin is going to not be found guilty and not go to prison, and then he'll be able to finish the film. It just feels super weird to me. I don't know that I would watch this film knowing that Helena Hutchins was killed while filming it. Apparently, Helena's parents depended on her. And in New Mexico, it allows for loss of consortium by the parents. Helena's parents and sister live in Ukraine and have not been able to come over because of the war. And they depended on her, I'm guessing, for support. Maybe Helena sent money to them. With her death, they are no longer receiving that support. court. I'm super interested in seeing what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks when Alec Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed show up for their hearing. We will see the DA's response to these different motions. There is a prelim hearing that has to happen with the judge where she decides if the case is going to go forward to trial. That date hasn't been set yet. Again, I circle this back to the beginning of my video. Do not talk when you are arrested. Baldwin did ask, am I being charged with anything? The police officer said no. So perhaps he thought because he wasn't being arrested that he could just say everything and anything he wants, not realizing that every word that he said is going to incriminate him and was used here as part of the decision to charge him. I will keep you updated as to what's going to happen. The DA is trying to send a message to Hollywood and all film and TV productions that this type of behavior is not tolerated in New Mexico. And New Mexico has a lot of productions because it has incredibly great tax incentives. I have worked on several productions that have filmed in New Mexico. So if you haven't caught my last video on Logan Paul and why he needs to stop scamming his fans and investors with his crypto zoo scam and lawsuits that have been filed, make sure to catch my video there. I am a strong proponent of victims, of those who are voiceless and powerless. And I really believe that people should be held accountable for the things that they do. I'm Tyler, the Hollywood attorney. Remember, we were born perfect and we forget. Bye.